Hello everyone, welcome to the Old Man in the Read. My name is Jerry. Today I'm going to venture into something a little bit different for my channel, and that's I'm going to talk about two non-fiction books and one fictional book. They're all loosely related to each other about disastrous Spanish expeditions into Florida. So I'll show you the books it's only three books, but they're all fairly related. So the first book I have is Castaways. This was written by Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, and he happened to be one of the 4 survivors from this expedition. But the expedition was led by Panfilo de Narvaez. It set off in 1527, and the ships, he went with 5 ships. He had about 600 men altogether. But the ships landed on the west coast of Florida, and Narvaez took about 300 men with him to set off on foot north in search of gold. And the ships were to stay in contact, just sail off the coast, and they would rendezvous somewhere up ahead north. So the men set off, but for them, the men on the ground, they discovered that the terrain in Florida didn't give them access to the coast for quite a bit of it. It was mostly swamp land, and they just could not get to the coast, and so the ships and the men lost contact with each other, and the men eventually were on their own on land. But they continued north in search of gold. They were in constant battle with a lot of the Indians in the area, and they were headed for Appalachia. It's an area that they evidently thought was made of gold, similar to the Aztecs and the Incas. But when they got there, they discovered a very powerful tribe of Indians, the Appalachi, and the Appalachi actually were able to defeat them in battle, and the Narvaez's men then found their way to the coast, and they decided to construct rafts to sail west to escape from there and go to New Spain. But once they set off, they sailed for a ways, and then a huge storm came up, and it swamped and swept most of the rafts out to sea, and there were only about 80 men who were able to get to shore, and they landed on Galveston Island. And then the story continues. Most of the story is about the men's lives after their arrival there. Most of them were enslaved by the Indians. They struggled. It was a real hard struggle to survive, and eventually 8 years later, 4 men were able to actually make their way to New Spain, where Mexico basically, and were able to finally get back to civilization. The next book I have is about Hernando de Soto, and it's titled Savage Quest in the Americas. But this is a very similar story, but the book begins with de Soto's exploits in Peru with the Incas. He was part of Pizarro's expedition that conquered the Inca capital. He became extremely wealthy, De Soto did, and when he returned to Spain, he was a very wealthy man. But he, while he was there, he found one of the survivors from the previous expedition, and that was the Alvar Nunez Cabaza de Vaca. And de Vaca told him about the cities of gold that they were trying to get to, and so De Soto decided he would go conquer that and get the gold. So he took an expedition. He had 6 or 9 ships, I guess. He had about 620 men and 220 horses. But he took an expedition, and this was in 1539. They landed, it's believed, Tampa Bay, but he set off, and they had arranged to rendezvous with the ships in a port north of there after De Soto went and got the gold, basically. So he and his 620 men and 220 horses headed north. They were in constant battle again, just harsh battles, but because they were well armored and had horses and well armed, they were defeating everybody they met. When they got to Appalachia, they discovered a very powerful army, but they were able to defeat them and made it into Appalachia. But when they got there, they didn't find a city of gold. It was just a large city. So De Soto took his men north, and they were still constantly in search of gold. He ended up going up through Georgia, they think as far as South Carolina, before they decided they would head back to the coast and rendezvous with the ships. So they traveled through Tennessee, but they came to a people, the Mabilla, who had heard they were coming, and they deserted the city. The Spanish took over the city, set up camp, and then the Mabilla people made a surprise raid on them, caught the Spanish off guard. A huge battle took place, and the Spanish lost over 200 of their men and all of their supplies. So they were left without the supplies and in a very desperate situation. They started again heading for their rendezvous, but for some reason they think it was either the fact that they didn't want to admit to a humiliating defeat, or they were still hoping to find gold. But anyway, they didn't meet up with the ships. They continued their quest and headed west, and they were not nearly as powerful as they had been before, and so they were in some pretty desperate fights. Ended up reaching the Mississippi. They crossed the Mississippi and then continued west for a little ways, and then turned back to the Mississippi, and De Soto caught a fever and died there. So his men constructed boats, and they then sailed down the Mississippi to the Gulf, and then eventually made it back to civilization in New Spain. And there were about 300 survivors in that, but it's a very similar story to the other one. And then the last book I'm going to talk about is a fictional story. This is The Moor's Account, and this was written by Leila Lalami, and she talks about the Narvaez expedition with the 4 survivors. One of the survivors in that expedition was a Moroccan slave named Esteban, who was one of the survivors, and so it gives his account, or it's told by him, and it's just a marvelous book because it gives it being fictional. She can put the reader right in with the whole story. And what was really interesting is Esteban, he was a slave when it began, but during the time that they were enslaved, he became an equal with everybody else in their struggle to survive. But then eventually, when they did manage to finally get back to civilization, he became a slave again. But it was just a marvelous story, really well told. But those are the books I read about the disastrous Spanish expeditions in Florida. Fascinating read. So I want to thank you for watching the video, and hopefully I'll see you on another. Thanks.